Hello. Fascinating, isn't it? To watch somebody throw on the potter's wheel. It looks so easy, and it is once you know what to do and how to do it. But with so much going on, it's a difficult process to teach. Your right hand is doing something on this side, while the left hand is doing something else on the other side. Not to mention everything that's going on deep inside the pot that you can't see. And this can lead to confusion and frustration. So in this video, I've included step-by-step instructions of exactly what to do, along with various synchronized views and cutaway animations of exactly what's going on during each step. If you use this movie as a reference as you practice throwing, your frustration and confusion will be less, and your experience on the wheel will be much more fun and rewarding. In this video, I'm going to cover the following things: wedging, centering, opening the clay up and pulling the walls, shaping, finishing, cutting the pot from the wheel, and footing. You will need the following items to follow along with this video: a pan of water, a needle tool, a 4" by 1" piece of chamois, a pointed wooden trim tool, a wire cutting tool, an elephant ear sponge, a triangular wooden rib, a ribbon footing tool, a wedging board or table, and of course your potter's wheel. With that said, let's get started. We're going to start by wedging a piece of clay about 1 to 2 times the size of your fist. Wedging is a way of removing all the air bubbles from the clay and also making it the same consistency so you'll have an easier time of throwing it. Air bubbles can create soft spots that can make the pot wobble, and if you have harder and softer spots in the clay, it can make your fingers jump and throw the pot off. So we want to make sure that we wedge it really well. Standing at your wedging board or table, you're going to place your right hand on top of the clay ball, slanted down a little to the right. Push down and forward on the clay, dropping your heel and raising your fingers, causing a little dent to form in the back of the clay. Don't make it too deep. What this does is twist the clay on itself. Then pick the clay back up, rotate it a little clockwise, and return your hand back on top. So it's down and forward, dropping your heel and raising your fingers. Then picking it back up, rotating it clockwise, and returning your right hand on top. As your right hand is doing this, your left hand is going to be on the left hand side, slanted in a little bit, with the fingers pointed downward. As your right hand pushes down and forward, your left hand will push in, down and forward, and rotate clockwise so your fingers are pointing forwards. It's also going to twist a little. So it's down and forward, rotating the clay, dropping the heel and raising the fingers, rotating the left hand so the fingers are pointed forward. Then raise the clay back up, rotating it slightly clockwise, returning your right hand on top, and returning your left hand so the fingers are pointed downward. What this does is twists the clay on itself, mixing the soft and the hard parts together. It also funnels it through this cone so that it comes down to the bottom, pushing all the air bubbles to the outside, breaking them. Then the clay is brought back around to the outside of the cone, so you can see it gets thinner and thinner layers of clay, so it mixes it together really well and breaks all the air bubbles. Practice this slowly at first, picking the clay up, pushing down and forward, rotating the clay, picking it up. And then once you get better, you can pick up some speed. After you've done this about 20 to 30 times, you can stop, roll the clay back up on itself, being careful not to put air bubbles back into it, and pat it from both ends. making it into an egg shape. Once you've wedged your clay, you want to place it on the wheel and get it centered. So I'm going to get my wheel head a little bit wet, not real wet, but a little damp, dampen the bottom of my clay. Then I'm going to try to slam it down in the middle as close as possible to the center. And I'm going to push it down and rotate the wheel a little bit. Now, for centering, you have to push against it with your right hand to push it into center. You can work with your arm out here, but it doesn't have a lot of leverage and it can move around a lot. So what I'm going to do is put my right elbow in my stomach and then place my hand around the clay so that a center line from my elbow through the middle of the clay, my hand, heel of my hand is behind that line, and it wraps around the clay. So I'm going to be pushing with this part of my hand. So now I can just lean forward with my whole body and put a lot more pressure on that than if I just pushing with my arm out here. At the same time my right hand is doing that, my left elbow is going to be high, my left hand on top, a little bit on the left hand side, and it's going to push down and in. So my right hand is centering the bottom half of the clay, my left hand centering the top half of the clay in opposite directions. When you put them on, you're going to lock your thumbs together, push forward, push down. With the wheel moving quickly, I'm going to get the clay wet. This is so that it slides through my hands really quickly and easily. Because if it starts to stick, it's going to twist the clay and cause it to have air bubbles, and it'll make it harder to throw. So always keep your clay wet and slippery. If it starts to dry out, stop, put some more water on it. Right hand in place and the left one on top in place. You're going to push in with the right hand and down with the left hand, pushing the clay into center. Now after you've gone around a few times, let off slowly. Let it go around a few times and then let off all the way. At the end of every movement that you're doing, you should always stop and let the clay move around a few times. Otherwise, what you're doing is pushing this off center. If I stop all of a sudden, it's way off center. So always stop, let it rotate a few times, then take your hands off slowly. A way to check to see if something is on center is to take your index finger, place it up close to the clay, and if it bounces off and on like this, it's not in center. Another way of centering is to start with your hands in the same position, and what you're going to do is push in on the bottom part of the clay and let the top left hand come off, and then you're going to push down on your left hand and let your right hand come out a little bit. So I'm going to push in on my right, let the left hand come up, making that taller, then I'm going to push down on the left, pushing it back into the right hand, centering mold. After I've done that, let it move around a few times and gradually let go. And now if we check it for center, it's on center. Another way to center is to take the two pads of your hands, place them close to the bottom of the clay. What we're going to do is push in and pull up at the same time, distributing that unevenness throughout the whole top of the clay. And then we'll go back and push the top hand back in to the rest of it. Pushing in, pulling up, then going back in and pushing down on the left hand, pushing it in to that right hand. Let it go around a few times and then let go. Checking it, pretty centered. I'm going to do one more regular centering. Make sure it's just well centered. Okay, it's nice and centered. The next thing I want to do is to open the clay up. I'm going to do that by making the clay wet, placing my right hand so it's resting on the outside of the clay, and placing my thumb in the middle top. And then I'm just going to gradually push down with my thumb to make a hole in the middle of the clay. Now, instead of pushing down up here where I don't have any stability and just in the middle of the clay, I'm going to keep my hand resting on the side of the clay for stability. And also I'm going to push a little bit on the side of my thumb as well as on the bottom of my thumb to keep it nice and even. As I push down, if it dries out, I want to stop, let it rotate a few times, put some more water on it, and then I'm going to rotate my thumb over the top edge and down into it as I drill down. Don't go too fast, nice and slow. I'm going to stop when I'm about a ½ inch from the bottom of the clay. Stop, let it rotate a few times, and bring my hand off. Now you ask, how do I know when it's a ½ inch from the bottom? There's a couple of ways to check and see. Stop the wheel head, grab your needle tool, place it so that your finger is on the needle up a ways, lower the needle into the clay, pass it through the bottom until it touches the wheel head, slide your finger down until it touches the bottom of the clay, and then grab a hold of the needle, pull it out, see how thick it is. It's about a ½ inch. Another way to check is to just place your thumb down and then slide your fingers down until they hit the wheel head. Place your thumb on the bottom of the pot, hold it there, gradually bring it up, place it on the wheel head, and look and see how much space is left. Now, if the clay is too thick, you can always make it thinner. But if it's too thin, go ahead and practice making the rest of the pull, and just remember how thick that is and try to make it a little thicker the next time. Basically, the process of throwing a pot on the wheel is making the sides thinner and taller. So once we've got the hole drilled in the middle, what we want to do is thin the bottom part of the clay and then bring it up. So the way we're going to do that is by making a C with my thumb and middle finger with my right hand, and then placing the finger on the inside bottom of the clay and my thumb on the wheel head on the outside of the clay straight across from it, and pinch my right middle finger towards my thumb. Don't push in on the thumb, but only pull out with the finger towards a spot a ½ inch up on my thumb, keeping the bottom nice and level. When I've undercut about 1 inch, stop, let the wheel turn around a few times, then let go on your hand. What this does is create an undercut, so now I can bring those walls straight up at that thickness. While you're pulling, there's going to get water in the bottom of the pot. You don't want this to happen, or water to stand down there, because that'll make the bottom get wetter than the sides, and as clay dries it shrinks. So if the bottom's wetter than the sides, it'll shrink more than the sides and a crack could appear. So every time you get done throwing, you should always go back in, take the water out of the bottom, and then, as funny as it seems, I'm going to hold my left index finger up to the inside of the pot, squeeze a little bit of water down on that, a little bit down on the outside, so that I've always got enough water to keep that slipping through my hands, but I don't want to let it stand on the bottom. To pull up, I'm going to place my left middle finger on the inside bottom of the pot, place my right index finger on the outside on the wheel head, and then I'm going to brace the two hands together by placing my left index finger and thumb on top of my right hand. The reason I do this is because if I didn't, both hands could move independent of each other, so I'm not going to be very steady. But by putting those two together and bracing them, if one moves this way, the other one has to move that way. So getting in that position so that the fingers are straight across from each other, I'm going to let the pot rotate a few times, and then freeze in that position and pull straight up. Once my inside finger gets to the rim, I'm going to stop it, bring my right finger up to the top with it, let it move around a few times, and then let go. So now I have walls that are the same thickness all the way from the top to the bottom, nice straight sides. You'll notice that the top of my pot now is kind of uneven, so I'm going to trim the top of this, and this can be done at any time during your throwing process. What you want to do is wet the top a little bit. I'm going to lay my left middle finger and left thumb on either side of the top of the pot, and then grab the needle tool in my right hand and laying it right up along the side of my thumb, put it below the lowest point on the top, and then gradually push straight in very slowly, and when it touches my finger, I'm going to let it rotate around a few times and then just pick that top right off of there. So now I have a nice straight top to work with. But I don't like it to be straight across, so what I'm going to do is pinch it like before and then run my right index finger in and out over the top of that to make it nice and round. The second pull is a lot like the first one, except for instead of using our thumb and middle finger on the right hand to make that undercut, we're going to use the left middle finger to push an undercut out, and then we'll pull our fingers up. So with the wheel moving pretty fast again, I'm going to mop that water out of the inside of the pot, get it wet on the inside and the outside, and then I'm going to place my left middle finger like I did before on the inside of the pot, my right index finger on the wheel head like before, and brace between like I did before. I'm just going to push out with my left middle finger until you see a bump developing over the top of my right index finger. Then let it move around a few times at that position, and then freeze into place. And keeping the bump the same size, I'm just going to pull straight up. My left finger gets to the top, let it stop in position, bring my right finger up to meet it, let it go around a few times, then let go. And you'll notice now that the pot is flared out a little bit. It's gotten bigger at the top than at the bottom. So what I want to do is make it go straight up and down. You always want your pot to go straight up and down, not flare out, because the thinner it gets, the harder it is to get back. You can make more shapes with it being straight up and down. So I'm going to do what's called collaring. take a little water and get the outside of the pot wet, and then placing the tips of my thumbs together, I'm going to place them on the back side of the clay, and then my fingers, my two fingers, I'm going to place at equidistances around the clay at thirds, and then grabbing hold of the clay at that size, freezing into position. I'm going to slowly just pick straight up, forcing the clay back into that straight up and down cylinder. When it gets to the top, let it rotate around a few times, then you can let go. So now I have a nice straight up and down cylinder again. This time as I try to pull up, you'll notice that I can't reach all the way down in with my left middle finger and reach the bottom and brace across with my fingers on both hands. So I'm going to have to put my whole left hand inside, using my left middle finger to push out as before, my right index finger on the bottom as before, but I'm going to only brace across with my thumb on the top of my right hand. So with the wheel, moving about medium speed now, because as the walls get taller on my pot, they're going to get thinner, and the centrifugal force of the pot will make the walls move out if it's going too fast. So I want to slow the pot down so that as I come up, it won't get wider. Placing my fingers and hands as I've shown you, I'm going to push out with that left middle finger until a bump develops above my right index finger. Stop, let it move around a few times at that point, and freezing, I'm just going to start to pull straight up, keeping that bump the same size above my fingers, pushing in a little bit so it doesn't flare out. Don't go too fast. Don't get in a hurry. Just slowly pull it straight up. When that left finger gets to the top, stop it, let off on it, bring your right finger up to meet it, let the pot move around a few times, then let go. And now if you'll notice, this time I can't really brace my hands together even with my thumb, so now I'm going to brace my hands together by just using the tips of my thumbs. So I'm going to use my left middle finger as before to push out down at the bottom, brace my hands together with my two thumbs, but instead of throwing with my index finger on my right hand, I'm going to place my middle finger on the base, and then this index finger is going to go on top, like I'm crossing my fingers. It's going to go on top of my middle finger, and it's going to rest right on that bump that I push out with my middle finger in my left hand, so that it adds some stability. Getting it wet on the inside and the outside. I'm going to slow it down even a little bit more, reaching down in like I showed you before. Brace together. I'm going to push out that middle finger, creating a bump, and let it go around a few times, freezing into place. I'm just going to start pulling that pot. Now don't let the bump get bigger. Keep it the same size. Also, don't hold your breath. Breathe while you're doing this. When the inside finger reaches the top, let it off. Bring the outside finger slowly up to meet it. Let them rotate a few times, then let go. During this time, as you're throwing, one thing you probably want to do is check the thickness of your pot at different times. You should have it only about 1/4 of an inch, or about the thickness of this rim, or thinner, to stop. But you don't want just the rim to be that thick. You want it to be the same thicknesses from the bottom to the top. So I'm going to take the water out of the bottom of this. Then I'm going to check the thickness. The way to do that is I'm going to take my needle tool and hold it like I was going to check the bottom, as I said earlier. But I'm going to place my left hand on the inside at the bottom and place the needle tool at the bottom, push it through the pot until it touches my finger, slide my outside finger up to touch the pot, hold it in place, withdraw it, and look at how thick it is. I'm going to try that about 3 different places to see how thick it is. And it should be about the same thickness all the way from the top to the bottom. And it is, and it's the right thickness, so I'm now ready to shape the pot. Shaping your pot is much like throwing on the last throw, holding your fingers in the same position, except you don't want to push that little bump out at the bottom. You just want to push the clay out or push it in. So I'm going to start with my hands in the same position, but if I want the clay to go out, I'm just going to push out with my left inside finger and let the right finger just come along below it. If I want to change directions, I'm just going to move my right hand up slowly on top of my left hand, push in with my right hand, and let the left hand follow beneath. Change back around, bring the left hand on top of the right one, push out. Just back and forth. So I don't want the wheel to be moving very fast. Wet the inside, wet the outside. Place my hands as I showed you before. And now I can't even brace all the way down, so I'm just going to pull my elbows in real close to my body so that my hands can't move too much. Let my thumb maybe rest on the outside of the pot a little bit. And as I said, just going to start to push out with my left hand and let my right hand follow beneath. And when I want to change directions, bring the right hand up on top of the left hand, push in with my right finger and let my left hand come follow beneath. Change again, bring my left hand on top of my right hand, and let the right hand follow beneath. Get to the rim, let it go around a few times, and let go. Once you've finished throwing the clay and shaping it, there's a few things you need to do to finish it up and get it ready for footing. First thing I'm going to do is make sure I get all that water out of the bottom of the pot. And I push down a little bit to densify the clay a little bit on the inside so that it won't crack later. Then I'm going to take this piece of 4" by 1" chamois, get it wet, and I'm going to lay it over the top and loop it over the top of that rim, push in on the sides and pull down a little bit just around that edge so that it looks nice and finished and it won't cut somebody later on maybe. Then I'm going to take my pointed wooden trim tool, and starting about a ½ inch up from the bottom of the pot, I'm going to just start to slowly carve away and push down my wooden rib tool slowly until it touches the wheel head and goes around a few times. I'm going to take that off. I'm going to take my needle tool, place it down on the wheel head, push it down underneath until it's cut that part loose, and I'm going to stop the wheel and cut that piece of clay away. What that does is makes this bottom nice and even, makes it an undercut so it looks a little nicer, and it also makes it so that it'll be easier and exactly round for footing it later on. Finish up just by touching up that bottom edge just a little bit. The last thing I want to do is cut this loose from the wheel head, because if I leave it on here, what's going to happen is the sides will dry, the bottom won't, and could crack later on. So I want to cut it loose so it dries and shrinks at the same time, and then I can foot it later on. Taking my wire tool, I'm going to grab it so that the ends on each side of my hands, pull it out tight, and then loop it around my fingers, place my thumbs on top of it, place it in front of the pot, push it down on the wheel head and pulling out at the same time, just going to slide it right underneath the pot. That'll cut it loose so that I can foot it easier later. Now once I've done this, what I'm going to do is just set this aside, maybe cover it with a plastic bag, let it dry for a while until it gets leather hard. Leather hard means that there's not a shine left on the pot, and you can move it without fear, you can handle it without fear of misshaping it, but it still can be bent a little bit. That's leather hard. So we're going to set this aside with a bag over it, let it dry till it's leather hard, then I'll come back and show you how to foot a pot. Now that I've let the pot dry a while until it's leather hard, it means it can be bent a little bit, but you can handle it without fear of misshaping it. I'm ready to foot the pot. There are 3 reasons for footing a pot. The first is to make the bottom and the sides the same thickness, about 1/4 inch. The second is to lift the bottom off of the flat wheel head so that air can dry the bottom and the top at the same rate so it won't warp or crack. And the third is to make a small rim on which the pot sits so it won't scratch any surfaces that it sits on. To begin with, for footing, I just want to turn the pot over and try to place it on the wheel head as close to center as possible. Now to make sure that it's centered, what I'm going to do is start the rotation of my wheel slowly and just place my finger up close to the rim and see if it goes off and on. If it goes off and on, that means it's not centered. I just want to take, and where it touches my finger, make a mark, stop the wheel, and move it away from where it touched my finger a little bit. And I'm going to repeat that process over and over again until I have it so that it stays on my finger all the way around. Now I want to secure the pot to the wheel head, so what I'm going to do is take my sponge with a little water on it and wet the rim of my pot and the wheel head. Take a small lump of clay and push it down on there lightly. You don't want to push it so hard that you distort the rim. Then I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to place 3 lumps of clay at thirds on the wheel. So the second one's going to be over here. Put the pot in the wheel head. Holding this pot steady so it doesn't move, I'm going to place the second one and then Turn the wheel head, wet that, place the third one. So now I've got a centered pot secured to the wheel head. I'm going to start by taking my footing tool, just starting the wheel to move around slowly. I'm going to start by cutting a trough about a ½ inch out from the middle of the bottom. I'm going to go down about 1/8 of an inch. And I like to hold my tool like this and then place my middle finger in the center of this. That steadies me so I'm not wobbling all over the place. This keeps me steady. I'm just going to lower that in there until it cuts about 1/8 of an inch out of that. The reason I like to leave this center little bump there is so I can see how much I've taken out. After I've taken that trough out, I'm just going to start there and gradually move out, cutting the same amount out. If it gets in your way, stop, take that off, go back, start over, and take. Go out till you get about a ½ inch in from the outside of the pot. Then I'm going to start at the outside edge, carve down another 1/8 of an inch. That makes 1/4 of an inch. So if I left a ½ inch on the pot bottom, now by taking out 1/4 of an inch, I'll have 1/4 of an inch left, which is the same as my width of my sides. And I'm just going to bring this all the way back in. Until I reach the inside bump again. You can see I've taken about 1/4 of an inch off of there. I'm going to finish up by taking that last bump out. So now I have the edge of the pot out here is 1/4 of an inch higher than the rest of the pot bottom. Then I'm going to take the flat edge of my footing tool. I'm just going to go in and out and take the rest of that out so I get a nice smooth bottom on there. I don't want to have a lot of ridges and bumps and hills and valleys. And I have a pretty smooth bottom, all lower than the edge. Now, this outside edge, I don't want it to be flat across either. I don't want it to sit flat, so I'm going to bevel my trim tool, slant it out a little bit, and just cut this outside edge at a bevel. Notice that I'm always bracing my hand someplace. I'm never just letting it float in the air someplace. I'm going to cut this at a little bit of a bevel like this. That does two things. One, it makes a ridge right here where the pot's going to sit, and it also lifts the pot, this slant lifts the pot off the ground just a little bit so it looks a little nicer. It kind of gives it a shadow underneath and makes it look lighter, so it doesn't look like somebody just cut it off and flopped it on the table. It looks like it's lifted up a little bit. Now I've got this lump of clay out here on the outside edge. I'm going to trim that off and make it seem to flow into the pot itself a little bit more. Get any excess clay down there. Get rid of all that excess clay so it looks a little nicer and it's lighter to pick up. You want to try to have your pot, when people look at it, you want them to pick it up and for it to be as light as it looks. So you don't want a lot of excess clay. So now I've dropped this down so air can get to the bottom and the top at the same amount. It won't warp or crack. I've made a nice little edge here. It'll sit on and it won't scratch the table. Beveled this out so it'll look nicer. Gotten rid of any excess clay along the edge over here. The next thing I want to do is take my wooden rib tool. I'm going to go back in the bottom and just push down a little bit on this. What that does is smooths it, but it also densifies the clay, compacts it, so that by compacting or densifying the clay, I'm making it so it's not as easily cracked. It also makes it nice and smooth for washing up later. Then I'm going to smooth and densify this foot here. Also on the inside rim a little bit there. Take any little bit off of that part. And the last thing I want to do in footing is just place my thumb and index finger on the outside, both sides of the foot like that, and just lay my right index finger on there and just to smooth that out and make it nice and smooth and even so it doesn't have any raw edges that can cut somebody later on. Because clay, once it gets fired, can be real sharp. So we want to get rid of those sharp edges. Once I've done all that, looks really good. I'm done footing. Stop the wheel. Take my pointed rib tool or whatever you want. Put your name on it. Remove the lumps of clay on the bottom. Now, when I'm done footing a pot, all done with it, I usually like to set it aside, put a piece of newspaper or paper towel or something over the top of it so that it dries slowly. I don't want this to dry too quickly or it could crack. So I just dry a piece of newspaper over it, let it dry until it's bone dry. That means there's no water left in it. But you want it to dry slowly, otherwise it could crack. In conclusion, there's a last couple of things I'd like to say. Number one is, if you're throwing and the pot gets off, starts wobbling all over the place, don't continue trying to throw it. You're only practicing bad throwing habits. Scrape the pot loose, wad it up into a ball, set it aside, and start with a new piece. That piece that you've taken off, don't try to throw pieces of clay over and over and over again right after it's been wadded up. You've got wet and dry places in it, you've got air bubbles in it all over the place, and it's too wet. Let it dry out, then wedge it up so it's good clay again, then try it again. Just let it set aside for a while. I hope that this video has been really instructive to you, and I hope that it really helps you learn how to throw and that you enjoy throwing. I wish you success and have fun.